On today's Locked On Bucks, we've had a day to decompress and to reassess the two performances we've seen this week against the Washington Wizards and the Memphis Grizzlies. We have some additional thoughts to share on that. Also, I've heard a lot of the chatter. Camille and Frank got into it a little bit last night. They've heard the same as well. But is it panic? Is it concern? How do you view what we're seeing from this team so far, with a lot of caveats to throw in? We'll get into that discussion. The health of Giannis. Oh, by the way, the elephant in the room as we get ready for the postseason, and a look around the league at the rest of what's going on for all of those teams locked in near the Bucks. We'll get into all of those conversations after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia here with you. You can find me on the Bucks Radio Network, joined as I am every day by Camille Davis. You can find her work on the Technical Foul podcast and the Pack a Day podcast as well, staying busy in football off season, which there apparently is none.
There's no
Camille,
off
we just
season.
we had all of the chatter with Packers free agency. AJ Dillon at the game against the Grizzlies picked a heck of a game to take in, but it never goes away. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and viewable on YouTube as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Camille, I guess we have to look back at a rather frustrating game and the loss to the Memphis Grizzlies. You and Frank went over it as best you could on the post-game show, but I guess I just want to start with where all of our heads are at, because I've seen a lot of panic and claims that it is time to panic. This team is going nowhere. A lot of the same chatter that we heard around the All-Star break when you and I talked about. We heard a lot more of the Bucks are going to finish in the play-in tournament chatter. I'm not defending losses to the Washington Wizards and Memphis Grizzlies on consecutive nights. But I'm not there yet. I'm not at the panic level. I can share why, but I guess we'll start with you. What's your takeaway on what we've seen this week and where this team appears to be headed?
Well, I can say first and foremost, I'm a lot less frustrated than I was last night, immediately doing post game with Frank after that loss. And part of what made that Grizzlies loss so frustrating and just like, what is happening, is that it comes right off the heels of losing to the Wizards. And it's the way that they lost, right? Like, understanding that Wizards game, like the 3-point shot wasn't falling. They were getting good looks, but it just was not falling. And then against the Grizzlies, the 3-point shot was falling until the end when it completely went away. They missed their last 10 threes and the Grizzlies win. But when you look at it, it's like, okay, the Wizards had 70 points in the paint. The Grizzlies had like 76 points in the paint. Like that's unacceptable. You cannot do that, especially against these two teams where you're looking at the rosters and you're thinking, okay, the Bucks have a size advantage. Like maybe they're going to really be able to pound the paint. And it wasn't the case. So both of those games happening back to back really exasperated how I was feeling about this team. But having 24 hours removed from it and being able to kind of think about it, I'm at a place right now where I'm not going to try to convince anybody of anything, because it's one of those things where you're like, you're right. If you say to me, like, I don't have any faith in this Milwaukee Bucks team, they've been too inconsistent throughout the season, I don't know which team is real, they can get bounced in the first round. I can't argue with you on that one. If you're somebody who was like, hey, this team has a real shot, Eastern Conference Finals, I can see their pathway there. When they're healthy and we have their best players playing, they look good. We see the Bucks have played better against good competition. Like, they should be good come playoff time. I agree. Like, I get it. I'm not going to argue otherwise. So, like, for me personally, I'm in a spot where it's like, I just have to kind of wait and see how this plays out. Like, at this point, I've like released expectations. That's the best way for me to put it. I have released expectation from this team, because not only I feel more aligned to that optimistic line of like, hey, if they're healthy, they got a shot, which is true. But then now the concern comes in, like, are they really going to be healthy when the playoffs start? And that piece of it now has my concern level peaking a little bit. And it's not necessarily, again, because of what we've seen, although it's been inconsistent. But again, we've seen them play really, really good ball as well, especially against good comp. But the health piece of it now is starting to get a little concerning.
That's almost to a T. My exact feeling is that, look, if you say the Bucks are going to lose in the first round, or you think they're going to lose in the first round, fine. I can't change your opinion on that. And, frankly, we've seen enough of a sample to say, okay, there are things trending towards believing that, just as we've seen samples that would say, no, I think this is a team that could give the Boston Celtics quite a challenge and potentially beat them in the playoffs. The reality is that this team, more than any other team in the East, certainly probably in all of the NBA, is the ultimate low floor, high ceiling team where any scenario is in play. And we've gone over the numbers in terms of what the Bucks have done against the best teams in the league. We've gone over the numbers, what they've done against the not so good teams, especially those teams in the middle, which is even more, again, not alarming, but it's what stands out the most about this week is the Bucks. We joke about, well, the Bucks play to the level of their competition. They still beat the bad teams. Every team does. It's been those teams that are in the middle of the pack that the Bucks have had the most struggles with. And to see this come against those two teams is the part that, again, I don't want to make too much out of one, and now in this case, 2 out of 82 games. But that's the thing that you come away saying, man, really now as you're getting ready for the playoffs, like this is not the way you want to be playing going into the postseason. Health is the biggest part of it, though. And I do get a sense there is an immense amount of frustration, not with anybody individually, just at the situation from everybody involved, from Doc Rivers, from the coaching staff, from the players, because Doc's been asked about this every single game. How frustrating is it that you haven't had a long runway with all of these guys, and gets the answer every single game. And I'm sure it's more and more frustrating when you look down and you see third straight game that Damian Lillard is out. It's a back-to-back, so you don't have Chris Middleton. Now, who knows, as we'll get to, what it's going to mean for Giannis moving into these final few games of the regular season. So that's the frustrating part, and that's why, again, these two losses, the season as a whole, to their body of work, you and I, we can't do anything to talk anybody out of saying, I don't trust the Bucks. I'm going back to the old school Frank Madden line of thinking and never trusting the Bucks. I don't think they'll get out of the first round. I don't think they'll go far. Any of that stuff. You know what? We can't change your mind, and there's enough information out there or data out there that would back that up for you. It's when the conversation starts where people are speaking in absolutes. If this team is going to lose in the first round, or this team is, who knows? Like as bad as it looked last night and this week, we can point to other instances where it looked equally as good against the best teams in the league. And I guess if you're going to hang your hat on one piece of hope, it's that, well, the playoffs, and especially how much we've talked about, there is no easy matchup. There is no easy draw going forward. Those are the teams you're going to be playing. So in theory, we should see a better version of the Bucks. But again, that all hinges on health.
It does. It does. And there's been a lot of conversation as well around the coaching and, the Bucks should have never fired Adrian Griffin and Doc's the wrong coach. And I said on post game last night, like, the people who don't like Doc Rivers, like, I get why. He is very Mike Budenholzer adjacent in a lot of different areas. But when you look at the team, it's like, okay, the Bucks were 30-13 under Griff. That is true. Like, they had a winning record. And since the coaching switch, they've been 17-16. Not as good, but like there are factors that go into that, from strength of schedule. We know that they had one of the easiest schedules to start the season, one of the hardest to finish. They've had more injuries in the second half of the season with Doc at the helm as well. But when you look at like the raw numbers, like I'm on Cleaning the Glass right now, and looking at the team under Griff, their net rating was plus 3.4. Under Doc, it's plus 3.1. So it's like the net outcome of how they're playing is similar in that regard. But the difference is that they're not scoring as many points now, and they're not giving up as many points now. And of course, we have to also take in consideration that since All-Star score, like we have seen, the free throw rates have come down. Like scoring has not been as high as it was previously. So in addition to the coaching switch, like there have been so many different things that have been going on in the league that also affect what we've been seeing on the court. And we've been saying with this Doc Rivers coach team is like, one, it's very hard to just helicopter in in the middle of the season and take over the coaching reins. Like, you don't have a training camp. You don't have time to get to know guys. Like, you're doing this all on the fly. So there is some level of grace that I am giving to Doc Rivers, just in the same way I gave some grace to Adrian Griffin being a first-time head coach. The reasons for the grace are different, but the grace is there for both of them nonetheless. And this comes during a season where the time is ticking. Like, this is a championship. They want a championship, and we know they have a level of urgency for it, because they wouldn't be paying 3 coaches if there wasn't a level of urgency to get it right this season. So the coaching piece of it, like, that is what it is. I do still think that this team has the tools, and they're going to have a better process to go further under Doc than they would have with Adrian Griffin. But as we've already mentioned, it's the health component of it right now that really all of this hinges on.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it is it's something that has kind of irked me a little bit when we see those comparisons thrown out there. And Lisa Byington as well, when she was on NBA Today, when the Bucks were on their West Coast road trip, pushed back on all of it too, saying, look, you guys are kind of jumping the gun here, and here's some things you're not taking into account when you're just pointing to the Bucks record broadly under Doc Rivers. So I do want to continue a little of that conversation and point out a couple of things that you touched on as well. And look, we mentioned the health. Giannis is the big one. We haven't gotten into that yet. You and Frank talked about it on the post-game show. Don't have much of an update, but there is an update to the injury report. So we'll get into all of that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. This next segment is sponsored by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered brokered dealer. And Camille, I mentioned what we've seen from this discourse that's going on. We thought we were going to get into some of the Giannis MVP discussion. That has suddenly been put on the back burner. And, again, Giannis's health is going to be a big part of that. But, I keep seeing it every time the Bucks lose. It's like death, taxes, and whenever the Bucks lose, somebody's going to tweet out the record of the Bucks under Doc Rivers. And we saw it again last night. The Bucks are 15-15 under Doc Rivers. As you pointed to, it's a much different schedule. It is a far more challenging schedule that the Bucks played under Doc, and starting with those 3 games under Joe Prunty. When you think about 2 were against the Cavs, 1 was against the New Orleans Pelicans. But it's been a much more challenging schedule. The injuries you noted have really started to pile up, because I think we can easily forget the Bucks were very fortunate with their health early in the season. We almost joked about it too, of like, man, how many games has Giannis missed? How many games has Dame missed? That you had those guys. The only thing was really the Jay Crowder injury earlier in the season, right? And Chris Middleton not playing on the back half of back-to-backs. That was it. And then you get to the second half, Damian Lillard, again, I wouldn't say injury, certainly not prone, but he had been in and out of the lineup at times. You missed Brook Lopez for 3 games for the birth of his child, but Chris Middleton out, 16 games? Giannis has missed a couple. Again, who knows, as we'll get to the injury report there. So there's just been a lot more things that have made it challenging since Doc Rivers took over. And the big thing is you didn't hire Doc Rivers, as you pointed to boost your regular season record and continue
Yeah.
winning at a 60 or 70% pace. You hired Doc Rivers to guide you to a deep postseason run. And there's no way for us to quantify this, but some of the things that you pointed to with the officiating shifts and what we've seen, those numbers, the net rating and everything else, similar. And look, to be fair, the Bucks defense, the first 10 games under Doc was elite.
Yeah.
It's cooled off to middle of the pack, basically. And I think that's reasonable to expect. This is probably where that team is. They're not a bottom 10 team. They're not a top 10 team. They're somewhere in the middle. Offense is taking a step backward. And, those things, I don't know about easy to explain, but there are reasons for it. The officiating shifts, as we've talked about a couple of times already, Dame has been the player most impacted by that, more than any other player in the league. He's gone from 6th to 27th in free throw rate since then. Everything is going to slow down the offense, right? And you were scoring under Adrian Griffin. I don't think it was sustainable, right? The defense was not doing the things you needed to do. When you get to the postseason, as Bucks fans learned for the last 5 years, you can have a high-powered offense, but if it's fueled on getting in transition, and that wasn't necessarily the case this year, but if it's fueled on getting in transition, hitting threes, that hits walls in the postseason. You have to have a consistent half-court offense. And it did feel like they were winning on talent, and that is not sustainable. Especially once you go up against some coaching challenges in the postseason and the game slows down and it becomes much more half court. So I get that it's easy to say, wow, you fired Adrian Griffin for this, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. And we can't make any type of assessment on this until the end of the season when you see how far this team went. And I suppose you could counter with, look, well, it's not fair to Adrian Griffin that he didn't get a chance to prove himself. And there is some truth to that. But the Bucks had a firm belief of this is not sustainable. Even some of the things that Doc Rivers has cleaned up defensively, even if it's just put you in the middle of the pack, it's put you in a much better spot. And I think that's been the overall vibe is as long as we have these 5 guys on the floor together, as long as we're healthy, we have a coach that has been in the postseason. That's the other elephant in the room is Adrian Griffin didn't get a chance to prove himself. He had never been in the playoffs as a head coach, though. So that's a big, big if. And that's kind of where the assessment has to come from once the season ends.
Yeah, it has to come from there. Like, that's what this team is going to be judged on, the playoffs. Like, we saw what happened last year in the flame out in the first round against the Miami Heat. So this season, the expectations are there. Again, a sense of urgency for this team. And the point about the offense is also really interesting to think about because under Grip, I would agree with that. They were really scoring on talent and leaning on that. We've talked about it. Hey, we would like to see more 2-man game with Dame and Giannis. Like, it's not enough right now. And when Doc came in, he's trying to implement his offense. And he mentioned himself, like, hey, there's going to be some times where this does not look right because I'm trying to drill in how to do this. I'm trying to drill in for guys to not just look for their shot. I'm trying to have guys look for that secondary read, the third read. Like, what happens if this is taken away from you? So there is some on the court learning, which we saw during the championship season, but that was on defense where the team was learning on the fly and using games to try to figure out what that's going to look like. And offensively, that's what this team has been doing. They're trying to fit these pieces together in the system that Doc wants them to run. And it's been more difficult to do that given the injuries coming in and out. Like Chris Middleton missing 16 games is huge. That's huge. And we saw that with a lot of the bench units that were run out here where it's like, if you could have a Chris Middleton, that would help out a lot because there are only 2 point guards on this roster, one being Dame, the other being Pat Bev. And Pat Bev has done a good job facilitating, but like, outside of the 2 of them, your other playmakers are Chris and Giannis. And like, that's it. Like, we know Doc's been really going with the PGPC thing with Pat Connaughton, but that's not his natural position. Like, I love that he's getting the ball in his hands and getting opportunities and getting the reps in, but like, you don't think Pat Connaughton, okay, he's in the game, he's going to facilitate the offense, more of a secondary ball handler than anything else. So the offense, like, again, I can see the reasons and I look at them like this is part of why the offense has been a little bit less high powered under Doc than it has been under Griff, because they're trying to figure some things out. And again, I have a certain level of grace with it, but with the performances being just so up and down and you don't know what you're going to get, it's like, I'm just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out and hope for health, because when healthy, like, it's good. And them being able to play off of talent is not a negative thing. Like, come playoff time, there are going to be times where they're going to have one of the three is going to have the ball and they need to make something happen. And they're going to know how to do that as well. But it's also nice to be able to run the offense and get other guys looks, get that ball moving, turn down the good shots for great shots. So listen, Justin, we're going all round and round. Like, I'm talking myself back in to get on the bandwagon of what this team can accomplish. But it's right there. And that's also why it's so frustrating when you see them not play well, because you know what they're capable of when they're getting back on defense, when they're hustling. Like that Pat Connaughton play where I can't, was that Washington or Memphis now, where it was against Anthony Gill. So when he gets back and it's like he blocks the shot, but there are no other Bucks around him. So Gill just gets his own board and puts it back up. And it's like, well, that's game. Like the hustle. And again, you expect to see that happen more in the playoffs, but I also think that it's kind of a dangerous game to play of like thinking a team can just switch it on and off all the time. So again, that's part of why this stretch of basketball we've seen from this team has been not encouraging in the least, because this is the time when you want to see the team ramping up and playing better. Instead, we're getting stinkers where they're losing back-to-back games against the Wizards and the Grizzlies. On top of that, like the double overtime loss to the Lakers, you get the win against the Hawks, but then you lose against the Pelicans. Like, it just has not been a good stretch over the last 5 games for this team as a whole.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say about this week, because we still haven't mentioned the Giannis update, is I wasn't so discouraged by the loss to the Memphis Grizzlies in a vacuum. When you think about the players that the Bucks were without, they did not have a point guard, right? Pat Connaughton again was your point guard in that game. Giannis clearly wasn't 100%, which we'll get to coming up here. So when you look at that, you say, yeah, I mean, it's a Grizzlies team defensively. They do get in a lot of passing lanes, force a lot of loose balls and turnovers. Without a true point guard to organize the offense, this is going to be a challenge. And the other part is, it is kind of unfair to point to, well, the Bucks were without Pat Beverly, Dame Lillard, Chris Middleton, without mentioning everybody that the Memphis Grizzlies were without and were without the last time these two teams played, and they did something similar. But I do think, Memphis, it's not an excuse. They've had a longer runway, right? They've had almost a full season to play with this group, and they've developed some of that. Okay, we know what to expect from these guys. You still should have won that game, but I didn't leave that game completely distraught and discouraged and saying, man, this is terrible. This team is going nowhere in a vacuum of just that singular game. I think that game is a shoulder shrug if you don't lose to the Washington Wizards the night before, because it's easier to write off and say, well, it's a back-to-back and we didn't have these 3 guys. Fine. This happens throughout the course of an 82-game season. But unfortunately, you lost to the Washington Wizards in a game where everything I said I did not feel after the Grizzlies game, I did feel after that Wizards game, especially knowing what was on the horizon with the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think that's what leaves you at least on edge for what's coming up later on tonight with the Toronto Raptors. Again, on paper, a team that has nothing to play for. But who knows what the Bucks are going to look like as we've tiptoed around the Giannis update. So we will update the injury report for that matchup, at least the initial one against the Toronto Raptors, what to potentially expect in that game. And is there any more clarity on the Eastern Conference in the standings as we're now approaching 10 days left in the regular season? We'll open up that discussion after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, Amazon Fire TV is one of the easier ways to get all your content on your TV. And maybe you're making the switch, going exclusively to streaming. You're cutting the cord and no longer using cable. That's where devices like the Fire Stick come in very, very handy. And let me tell you, if you're not tech savvy, the Amazon Fire Stick is one of the easiest things to use out there. I speak from experience because I set up my parents with one. I don't get any calls on how to use it. I get calls and texts on passwords for streaming services, but that's a different story. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you just plug into your existing TV and provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and the most of the big pro leagues and conferences in college as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos, all of that. You name it, it's on Fire TV. Check out the Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. And of course, Locked On Bucks, Locked On NBA fans, you can find all of this on Amazon Fire TV. As we mentioned, first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and the Amazon Fire TV channels in the TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts you've come to expect from Locked On, plus our national shows that get into every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Latest injury reports, or first injury report, I should say, Camille, for the game tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to this, against the Toronto Raptors. Not totally surprising. Pat Beverly is listed as questionable with that right ankle sprain. Damian Lillard is questionable as well with a right adductor strain. So it is, I know it's still a core injury, the adductor, but it has moved from groin to adductor. And it was the right groin, and now it's the right adductor. So that's eyebrow raising to say, okay, is this issue just moving up the body for Damian Lillard? But the big one as well, Giannis is also listed as questionable with that left hamstring issue. So the Dame piece we'll start with. That was the most surprising to me, and I think to a lot of Bucks fans, because you had to assume at the very least Giannis is going to be questionable for the game. I would not doubt he's doubtful for the game, given how he looked, that we saw him, I don't know if it was the hamstring, but at least grab at the back of his leg a couple of times during that game. But again, Doc Rivers over the weekend had indicated, yeah, there's a chance that Dame does not finish the road trip. He didn't, and was asked before the game against the Wizards what's his status, and said he might play tomorrow. That was the Grizzlies game. If not, we think he's going to play Friday. He was asked before the Grizzlies game and gave the same answer of, yeah, I think he's on track to play Friday. And now we see questionable with something different from the groin strain. So that is at least interesting. And as we talked about in the first half of the show, it's not what you want going into the playoffs to have these lingering types of issues.
No, it's not. And as mentioned again, with the Chris Middleton being out 16 games, there's only been a handful of games where all of the big three have played under Doc. Like, they have some reps playing with each other before, but they haven't gotten the chance to really get those in-game reps in, playing the way that Doc wants them to play. So the Dame injury, it caught me off guard. Like you said, I'm guessing it caught many off guard because the initial report was him being out for the personal reasons with his son's birthday. And then to see the injuries, and then you're like, wait, I thought like in the previous game it was his calf and he had the stitches in his lip. So like to see a different body part listed, which is kind of like, wait, hold up, what's happening? But I did see that he did some pregame warm-ups yesterday. So it seems like it's not something super serious, but rather the team exercising caution with him ahead of the playoffs, which, again, we talked about a little bit before we recorded. But if that's the train of thought with Dame, I wonder why that wasn't the train of thought with Giannis on the second night of a back-to-back. And I'm sure part of it is from Giannis himself. Like after the game, he mentioned that it was important to him to play through this, to try to make mistakes, get with the flow of the game. A very Giannis answer, which is part of the reason why we love Giannis. Like he is somebody who he's in pain and he has a very high pain threshold, it appears, because he plays through some things. But we also heard him mention ahead of him missing games for the hamstring, just like you can't play with hamstrings. Like this is one of the injuries where you need to be cool. So we'll have to see how this all shakes out on Friday with these guys. As for the Pat Bev injury of it all, seeing him being questionable as well, we know he has the wrist already, but the ankle sprain looked a lot worse to me in real time than what the injury report has come back up saying what he has. So that is something at least somewhat positive to take away, seeing him listed as questionable as well. So we'll see how that shakes off. But more than anything, health heading into the playoffs is so important, but the standings also have a little bit of pressure on it because of where the Bucks are. Had they won these games against the Grizzlies and the Wizards, the conversation would be a little bit different. Maybe the level of urgency to have guys try to play to get some wins wouldn't be as high.
Even if you won one of those games, you'd be at 28 losses, right? And you'd be 3 up in the loss column on the Cavs, on the Magic, and on the New York Knicks. You have the tiebreaker against the Knicks. You can get it against the Magic. You don't have it against the Cavaliers. But of those 3, the Cavaliers have the most challenging schedule remaining. But it's left the door open. And I know I spent quite a bit of time the last couple of weeks pointing to these 4 games, which we're now at game number 4, and saying, look, if you take care of business in these games, it's probably a wrap that you are going to be the 2 seed. And now you're 1-2 in those games. So not what we had in mind. But I suppose the other piece of it, Camille, is I just don't know what seed is important for the Bucks until we get closer to having an understanding of who is going to be where. The important part is don't finish 4th. And I still, even with these struggles, I don't think they're going to finish 4th. Still, a lot would have to go wrong for that to happen. You'd essentially have to win, probably 2 of your final 6 games to finish 4th in the Eastern Conference. But in terms of 2 and 3, I understand you can point to the road record and say, well, this speaks to this Bucks team really needed home court advantage. I'm just not sure about that. I mean, we saw the Bucks win on the road, Game 7 in Brooklyn, close out the Eastern Conference Finals on the road as well, close out the series in Miami on the road, and essentially wrap up the series, because we all knew after that Game 5 win, they're winning it in 6, doing that in Phoenix. So we've seen them do it before. And, not to get too sidetracked, but even the conversation over road record, it's certainly not ideal to be below 500. And when you look up and down the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference, you look at the elite teams and you see they have much better road records than do the Bucks. And you immediately drift to, well, this isn't good. And this is maybe more fodder if you're in that group that's convinced this team isn't going far. But let's also point out the Denver Nuggets were below 500 on the road last season and won an NBA championship. The Miami Heat were a sub 500 team. So it's one of those weird things in the NBA. So we don't know. 2, 3, I don't know that it's important one way or another, especially, and I don't mean disrespect here, especially if the Orlando Magic or Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be the 2 seed and the Bucks are the 3. I don't know that it's all that crucial too. You got to get the 2 seed, because it's ultimately going to come down to who else is seeded where, who's in the 7 and 8 matchup, who's in the 6 matchup. And that's stuff we frankly may not know until the final day of the regular season.
It's trending that way. Like if we know before then, I will be surprised. Like at this point, I'm fully expecting for us not to know how these standings are going to shake out until the last day of the season. And not just in the East, like the West as well. Like it's just been
crazy. Yeah.
Such a tight race to the finish here when it's coming to the standing. So for me, the road thing does give me some pause where it's like, what's going on with that? But the pause that it gives me is added emphasis on to why I want the Bucks to finish with the highest seed they possibly can, to have as many home games down the stretch as they can. Like it's good for them to know, like, we have one on the road before, we've done it before. But we think about that championship team, a lot of the core members who played then, they're still here and they're still going to be the guys getting a lot of the minutes. Your Chris, your Giannis, your Brooke, Bobby, Pat, like those are 5 key contributors from that championship team who will be on this playoff team and ready to go, and having that idea of like, okay, we've done this before, we can do it again, so on and so forth, but hasn't been encouraging. So we can't keep looking back and saying like, man, if the Bucks would have won these games, it'd be a different situation, because at this point now it is what it is. They lost those games, and now the final 6 games of the season are going to be really, really interesting for this Bucks team and their seeding, because you look at the standings right now and there are games playing as we are talking, but the Magic are only 2 games behind the Bucks, and we see the Magic 2 more times before the season wraps up. So like those games have an added emphasis. The Knicks, they're behind the Bucks as well. And we just heard the news today that, Julius Randle, he's going to be out for the rest of the season. He tried to do everything he could to not get the surgery.
That in itself, I would encourage listening to Locked On Knicks to get their take on that, because if you had issues with the Bucks' lack of transparency over injury updates, the Knicks basically lied for over a month, saying Julius Randle was progressing, and then we come to find out from Julius Randle himself, he was doing on-court workouts, re-aggravated the injury, needs surgery, and that's why he's out for the season.
Yep. So it's things can change quickly, but yeah, it's important for the Bucks to at least, like, 3rd seed is the lowest seed where I'm like, I feel comfortable about the Bucks' chances going to the playoffs. When you get to that 4 or 5 matchup, it gets shaky. 2 seeds ideal, but hopefully the Bucks can hold on to that down the stretch here.
So we're taping this Thursday night, and you will know the results by the time you listen to this show. But there are 2 crucial games or big games that involve the Bucks this evening. The 76ers are in Miami, and as of this moment, it's late in the 4th quarter, and the Heat are up 2 possessions on the Sixers. But again, just as I feared, and I warned all of you, Joel Embiid looks very, very good. He's, I think, close to 30 points in that one in the 4th quarter, and he's been efficient. So that's one to keep an eye on. The Knicks were down by 20 in the first half to the Kings. They're now up by 2 in the 4th quarter. That's obviously an important game for the Bucks. So the context behind that, if the Miami Heat lose that game, 76ers in all likelihood are going to be the 8th seed no matter what, unless they go on a tear and don't lose again, and the Pacers, Heat, and other teams really stumble here. But they're likely going to be the 8th seed. If they win this game, Miami drops back to 7 once again, and the Pacers would jump up to 6. So the play-in tournament teams would be Heat versus Sixers, with the winner playing the 2 seed, which could be the Bucks in the first round. And the Knicks, of course, it's a matter of, look, if we can just put that team out of reach and then worry about only 2 teams in our rearview mirror that are chasing us, that's the big part there, because the Knicks loss would drop them to 3 games back of the Bucks once again in the loss column, with 6 games remaining. And of course, the Bucks hold the head-to-head tiebreaker, so that's essentially 4 that they're back of them. So that would go a long ways to walling off the Knicks in catching the Bucks. But we'll know, by the time you listen to this, if none of those things happened in favor of the Bucks. So tomorrow or tonight, the Bucks back in action against the Toronto Raptors. And again, it's going to be like this, just as we said, it's going to go down to the wire. There are a handful of games every single night that are going to carry importance for the Bucks and Bucks fans to keep an eye on. So while the Bucks are hosting the Raptors, you also have the Bulls hosting the Knicks on night 2 of a back-to-back. The Heat, night 2 of a back-to-back. In Houston against the Rockets. The Pacers are hosting the Oklahoma City Thunder. So very, very big matchups while the Bucks are hosting the Toronto Raptors. And then the other big ones on Saturday, you have the Cavaliers in Los Angeles, the first of a back-to-back. And the 76ers play those world beaters, the Memphis Grizzlies. So from here on out, there are going to be games, even on off days, that as a Bucks fan, you have to pay attention to and see if the Bucks can get any help. But the biggest help the Bucks are going to get, or could get, I should say, is going to come on the front of health. And hopefully that is something that once we get into the final week of the regular season, that part will be there, even if the consistency factor is not. One other thing to share, I haven't even told you about this yet, Camille, but I think it's officially going to happen now. So I got some type of confirmation today,
Oh boy.
trading texts with one of our pals. And number one, he was curious just what the hell is happening with this Bucks team. So he had some questions on that. But for everybody that stuck around to the very end of the show, we don't know the day yet, but it does sound as though we are going to have Kane Pittman back on the show next week, probably early in the week, but we're still ironing out the details. But it sounds like he's finally used his publicist and assistant to get that clearance, and he is going to make his return on the show next week.
Hey, I'm going to do the sound effects for everybody. I know that's been something we've been saying. We've been doing the Doc Rivers close. It's close. It's close. It's close. But you guys, it really is close. It's coming.
Hopefully this doesn't become the everything else that we've seen with injuries of we thought it was going to happen and then it gets postponed. But no, I feel pretty good that it's going to be next week, just looking at the updates that I got from him. So look forward to that. We should also point out the post-game show following that Knicks game, which could be a big game. And by the way, one thing that you and I were joking about as well, don't laugh, but who would have thought that final game of the regular season could decide the 2 seed with the Bucks and the Orlando Magic? Again, obviously some things would have to go well for the Magic. The biggest piece would be winning that game in Milwaukee in less than a week at Fiserv Forum, but that could be a very important game. In the meantime, the game that's 1 week before that, Sunday, this upcoming Sunday against the New York Knicks, the post game is going to be you and I. I don't know if we broke the news to Frank yet, although yes, Frank wants to do. Okay, so it's going to be you and I, but it's going to be delayed in that it's going to come Monday morning because I, of course, have the radio broadcast. And then afterwards, I have to catch up on night 2 of WrestleMania. You will also be doing the same.
I'll be watching night 2 of WrestleMania myself.
So the post-game show will be Monday morning. Maybe we'll do it live, too. Hopefully there's a reason to celebrate. But look for that Monday morning. It won't be there right away at night.
Yeah. So just so you guys know, a heads up on that. It will be on the way, but your host of Locked On Bucks, we love wrestling. So there's going to be a little delay while we indulge in that love for wrestling as well.
And I was texting with David Locke earlier in the week too. I got to remind him we need a Locked On Wrestling channel here on the network.
With guest appearances from people around the network who are fans. Yeah.
Guest appearances. I mean, that's why I was working hard to get him to return this week in light of the Big Red Machine to get Kane here for WrestleMania week. That's going to be it for today's show. Again, look for the post-game show, the Bucks and the Knicks, Monday morning. I think we'll probably try to do it live too, so we can take your interaction. Hopefully the Bucks give us a reason to do that. But Monday morning, the post-game show of the Bucks and to the New York Knicks. And if you got thoughts on night 2 or even night 1 of WrestleMania, drop them in the comments as well. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll catch up with you once again Monday morning with more Locked On Bucks.